So then it turned out to be that all the sessions about breast cancer were already filled in. And I will come back in my session of tomorrow that I consider myself as a breast cancer specialist with radiation oncology as a tool and not the other way around. However, I have other topics that I can easily cover. One of them is flash radiation therapy. You heard something about it yesterday, and I will go more into detail. More the principle of how could we bring flash radiation therapy into the clinics. And tomorrow I will speak about education and I will speak about mentorship. And all this is thanks to the work I did as president of ESTRO and the European Cancer Organization. So this is my disclosure, and this is directly related. It also comes from my involvement in flash research. Since the 24th of February, all of my talks, and this have been a lot, have one of those slides to remember us about the madness of what is ongoing in the northeast of Europe. And I add to that, it's not only there, there are several places in the world where things happen that are not justifiable. So let's start with a small introduction. We should not forget that most patients who are cured thanks to surgery. Then comes radiation oncology, then only comes systemic therapy. This used to be in 2000 still between 5 and 8% for systemic therapy. It increased a lot with the new modalities, but what we tend to forget is that the big breakthroughs that we have seen are mainly in rare circumstances. We see a lot of improvements in breast cancer, but 70% of the breast cancer patients are already cured with just surgery, radiation therapy, and basic systemic therapy. All the new drugs are there for very specific circumstances and serve only a small part of the population. However, breaking it up like this is not correct. Patients are cured thanks to a combination of treatment. And you cannot split it up. It's not like you make an omelette with a lot of ingredients and then you say, I want the tomatoes out of it and I want the onion out of it. It doesn't work like that. It's a mixed, combined modality, multi-modality treatment. In radiation oncology, we have basically, of course there are other applications, but basically 3 big modalities. The external beam linacs, brachytherapy, and intraoperative radiation therapy. So what are the limitations? The limitations are manifold. It's the vicinity of organs at risk nearby the target volume. It is radioresistance of tumors like the glioblastoma left under, and it is multiple metastasis that goes beyond the scope of a local treatment. So what we challenge for, look at it, the date 1936 is the first time that this drawing was presented. Since soon to be 100 years, we are looking to widen up the therapeutic window of the tumor control probability and the normal tissue complication probability. We want to have this as broad as possible. And for some diseases, it's easy. For others, it's difficult. I come back to that later. So where can flash be brought into this? Well, this is the machine with which the landmark pivotal study was published in 2014. It was a machine constructed in 1987 for completely other things. When I arrived in Curie in Paris as head of department, this machine was still between brackets functioning. It costed thousands of euros to get it functioning for a few minutes. It was completely worn out. It was just too old and not beyond repair. So that's how we went into a tender. I invited Varian, Electa, Accuray, SIT, and many others. We had only 2 offers for a dedicated flash research machine, and that was then finally won by SIT. And this is the study. So it's about mice. Mice who had tumors in the lungs and received a single dose of 17 gray. And this is where it all started with. So what did they do? They irradiated the entire lungs of the mice and they followed toxicity. And what you can see, this is actually the results. No irradiated or flash the lungs after being examined, after death of the mice, look normal. While with 17 gray conventional, the mice started dying after 4 to 6 weeks and were nearly all dead after 8 weeks due to lung fibrosis. While a normal or a flesh irradiated mice has a lifespan of several months. So they were sacrificed at the same moment to do this evaluation. At the same time, the tumors in the lung were irradiated, and it turned out to be that whether you gave the radiation with conventional dose rate or with flash dose rate, you had the same effect against the tumors. And that's the definition of the flash effect. Less toxicity, same tumor killing effect. This is even more exciting, more understandable. So it's difficult to understand, but believe me, mice have some memory function and you can test for it. It's highly dedicated. We just treated mice. We sent them to California to do it. It's not so easy, but you can test the memory function of mice. So if you look at the outer left, it's control, no radiation, and the mice scores nearly 80% recognition ratio. If you go to the right, it's 10 gray single dose on the brain, and you see that the recognition ratio drops to below 60. And when you give the 10 gray with a very conventional dose rate or up to 20 gray per second, the effect on memory is very pronounced. When you give it in 30 gray per second, you see there is some sparing. With 60 there is real sparing, but starting from 100 gray per second, you have absolutely no effect of the 10 gray on the brains on the memory function of the mice. So what could be the clue here? And we don't know yet exactly what explains the flash mechanism, but in these experiments, control mice and the 10 gray flash mice had still the stem cells in the periventricular tissue, while in conventionally treated, the stem cells were out, were all killed. So probably that's one of the components explaining flash. And that's what flash does. The tumor control probability stays the same, and the late normal tissue complication probability shifts to the right. You can give more dose to have the same complications, or with the same dose you have less complications. So that's the flash definition. This is a pig where single doses of 28, 31 and 34 gray, single doses were given. Above is conventional dose rate, below is flash dose rate. The difference is very clear. Necrotic in conventional. There is of course some effect, but that is much less pronounced with flash. This is the first human patient who received flash 15 gray with low energy electrons. Let's be honest, this patient did not benefit. It's just showing it works, because the benefit would be if that could not be obtained with conventional dose rate. And of course, one single shot of 15 gray you can give with conventional dose rate on the skin as long as it is a low energy electron beam. So this is an estimation, an update from 1 year and a half, no, nearly 2 years ago, 1 year ago, sorry. An update of the estimation of respective effects with conventional dose rate and flash dose rate. So the tumors are below. There is no flash sparing effect, luckily enough. And the memory sparing effect is apparently, as far as we know now, the most pronounced. So what are the requirements to make the transition to clinical research? We have to validate this in human beings, the safety as well as the efficacy. In first step, we don't have to prove that it is better. We just have to prove that it is at least as good. And as a second step, we need to demonstrate that it is better than conventional dose rate. And that can be that either it is less toxic for normal tissues and or more effective for tumors. And now you would think probably, no, we're only speaking about the above. Maybe not. The first experiment is not yet published, but it is on a stem cell line series. No, sorry, it was on a mice. So a mice with a tumor in the leg that was irradiated with conventional or with flash, tumor effect identical. Then the mice, the leg was clamped, hypoxia. Conventional dose rate protected the tumor. Flash dose rate, no protective effect of the hypoxia. So it might be, and it's part of the explanation of the flash effect, the hypoxia, it might be that flash overcomes the protective effect for tumors due to hypoxia. So what we need, and then I come to my domain, which is the interoperative, develop the interoperative in the participating centers, build a prototype, go to proper translation to clinical circumstances, dosimetry, treatment planning calculations, and start the first clinical trials. Indications, I come back to that. So this is the dedicated research machine. The right upper corner is the one from Institut Curie, which was installed when I was there, and the left lower corner is the one from Antwerp that was also installed when I was there. So the particularities of the machine is that everything can be adjusted. In contrast to the adapted machines, I can name names, Mobitron, the adapted Clinax or TrueBeams, they're limited in their capabilities. This machine has a complete control of your energy, varying from 1 gray in an hour to, as you can see correctly, it's even 14,000 gray in a second. So it is hugely variable, but more important, and we need to test all this, it's pulsed dose rate. It's not continuous, these machines. And probably we need pulsed doses for flash effect. So you can vary the height of the pulse. So the mice that we irradiated and sent to California received one single pulse of 10 gray. You can vary the pulse repetition frequency, the time between, etc. Everything is adjustable. And this is what we need to do the proper clinical research before we can go the best way to the clinics. So to the clinics, we need to learn whether we can fractionate, what the time between the fractions can be, what is the balance between losing conformality and the flash effect. Because with intraoperative radiation therapy with electrons, it's identical. There is no change. You just give the dose in a much shorter time. But when you go to protons or high energy electrons, or one day maybe I come back to that, photons, then you cannot give a VMAT with 100 gray per second. You cannot have a machine that does it that fast. So let's go one by one. The proton machines, major players are involved, both IBA and Varian are investing, and also the other ones. It can be based on existing infrastructure. However, I've seen in Paris how difficult it was to get at least that machine working in flash mode. The cons is that nowadays with protons we're getting a very conformal dose, and if we switch to flash, at least for the first 10 years, I don't see a solution how we can use that in flash as well. So the first trial, which was presented and published with 10 patients with bone metastasis in the limbs, had just shooting through protons. So if you want the protons, you will not be able to use the Bragg peak with current technology. You will need to use this part of the proton beam. And then suddenly, why are we then using protons? It's logical that we go to protons because the machine can do it, but we lose the conformality completely. The Linux for photons. Well, Billy Lou is getting many millions in California to get a phaser running, which is a phased array of 17 Linux that ultimately should shoot at the same microsecond to give flash dose rate with photons, because with one Linac, with current technology, forget it. One day it will work, but I think it will work about the same time that we fly off to explore other planets. And then brachytherapy, just bringing in the source, is already much more time than what you are allowed to use for the flash effect. So that's mission impossible. And then a very attractive one, very high energy electrons. There is ongoing research. There is a lot to do about complexity, costs, radio protection, but there are some major breakthroughs. And then the easiest is intraoperative radiation therapy with electrons, because it is exactly the same. The only thing that you change is that you don't treat in 1.5 minutes, like we do typically for breast, partial breast, but we would treat in 20 milliseconds or something like that. So what are the perspectives with the intraoperative electron? It exists for a long time. It's not very popular worldwide. There are a little bit more than 100 teams which are working with intraoperative electron-based radiation therapy. While I was president, we started with a task force. It had nothing to do with flash. It was just to bring it some, let's say, organization. And we have 6 guidelines. We are getting more and more aligned with external beam. Now the machines can do image-based target volume definition and real-time target volume dose calculations and in vivo dosimetry during the treatment planning. And it is the closest that you can get currently to flash. And that's explaining why there is much more interest currently into intraoperative electron-based radiation therapy. The first interop teams worked with the patients in the operating room driving to the bunker. Now, of course, you have the operating room and the machine is in the bunker. The advantage of this machine is that you don't need extra shielding. It's auto-protected, so you don't need a bunker, which is very practical. And then from a personal view, I love to participate to those interventions. Then the 6 guidelines: locally recurrent rectal cancer, primary locally advanced rectal cancer, breast cancer, of course, pancreatic unresected, pancreatic borderline resected, and finally the sarcoma. That are the 6 guidelines that we published in 2020. Looking into incidence and mortality rates, well, incidence, it's only breast and colorectal, but it's a small percentage of the patients that are eligible. But if we look into the mortality, you also have pancreas. There are more people dying due to pancreatic cancer than to prostate cancer every year in the world. It's now already 400,000. It's increasing at a very high speed. I have to replace this by the 2020 figures. So in the upper left corner is the preclinical machine that we're currently using in Curie, in Antwerp, in Pisa, and some more are under production. So it's dedicated, you can adjust all the parameters. And the machine right under is a rendering still, but this is a machine that will be ready to be installed in the clinic in a little bit less than 1 year from now. So it will be the replacement of the current machine, but also it solves all the shortcomings of the current machine, but especially you can switch it from conventional dose rate to flash dose rate. So as long as flash dose rate applications are not clinically validated, we can, of course, use it in conventional dose rate. It's not that it's a lost thing for that. Energy is very similar to what the current machine offers. The biggest difference to what currently is available is that it also offers flash dose rate. This also does not need shielding, so it can be operated in a normal surgical operating room, and this goes completely integrated with an ultrasound-based imaging system and treatment planning system. So I told this before, we have to go to the clinical trials, and these are the possible indications. So let's go to the most important ones. Partial breast irradiation. What is currently the challenge with intraoperative radiation therapy? It's local tumor control. It's worse than external beam, than brachytherapy. Side effects are not an issue, and I will show you how it will be possible with flash to improve local control while maintaining side effects low. So a target volume is the 2 centimeters of tissue around where originally the primary tumor was, which is a virtual point if we have no uncertainties. But we have uncertainties. That's the difficult one. So when the surgeon takes out the tumor is rarely, I see that my time is coming short, the tumor is rarely in the center of the excision cavity, it's eccentrically. It means that your target volume is often not just around the surgical cavity, but at one side more than at other sides. That's why the partial breast irradiation techniques vary a lot. It's a short description, it's an article which is available, but basically it's comparing apples and oranges, or apples and pears, like we say in Dutch or in some other languages. And techniques are important, but they only serve a goal. It's not the other way around. Target volume has to be defined, and we have to target correctly the target volume. This is conventional surgery. We think we know the target volume because it's just a surgical cavity with a margin, which is absolutely nonsense, because if the tumor would be completely eccentrically, the target volume is also completely eccentrically. But with oncoplastic surgery, it's even much more difficult to recognize the target volume. So if you have a tumor of 1.5 centimeters, excised with margins of 0.5, it means that the CTV is 2 minus 0.5 is 1.5 centimeter around the original tumor bed, but for the explanation, let's use the excision cavity. So this. So with low energies put in the cavity, and I do not discuss the position of the tumor within the cavity, you treat a low dose just surrounding the surgical cavity, and you don't reach the full dose to the full target volume. If you would give the appropriate electron application, then you can treat the entire target volume to the right dose. But so let's always think and keep some skepticism. But what's the problem? Because we know that the Elliott trial showed a high rate of recurrences. Well, what went wrong? Especially two small applicators. They used applicators starting from 3 centimeters. 3 centimeter electron beam. You treat a nut, nearly nothing. So the issue is that the surgeons didn't want to make a large incision. If you need a 6 centimeters diameter, you need an incision, a scar of 11 centimeters. That's too big. The surgeons don't want to do that. So they say, okay, I go to 8 centimeters, but not bigger. The biggest you can get in is 5 centimeters external, is 4 centimeters internal. So instead of treating the 78.5 cubic centimeters, which is the real CTV, you only treat 28 cubic centimeters and you get your recurrences because you miss the right CTV. So what could you do with flash? Use a bigger applicator, including part of the skin, without increasing your incision and or giving the radiation therapy preoperatively. So that's part of the research that we are aiming to do. With the boost, it's much less, and we should use much less boosts. Currently, in a country like France, Belgium, 95% of the patients receives a boost. In Denmark, it's 15%. In the UK, it's 25%. I saw in the Netherlands, it's still 35%. We should boost much less. But anyway, if we boost, keep the volume small and we don't have issues. If we go to rectal cancer, we see issues both with local regional tumor control and with side effects. I think that it's especially in recurrent rectal cancer where flash might have a future role. Pancreatic cancer, the big killer, there flash by increasing the irradiated volume intraoperatively or increasing the dose could be a real game changer. Sarcoma, I think in extremities, yes, because sometimes you have some side effects. Retroperitoneal, we have a lot of challenges, but it's very difficult to treat the retroperitoneal cavity.
We continue for 1 minute.
Yep, high-grade brain tumors might also be a possible game changer. And then I will skip this. It does not need to be intraop. It can also be skin tumors, especially the non-melanoma. So this I said, I need to show this. So increasing complexity and increasing value. The bread and butters is easy, but doesn't add a lot. The white elephants doesn't add a lot, it's very difficult to obtain. Pearls is not difficult, and game-changing. Oysters is difficult, but game-changing. So if we look into flesh intraop, I think the bread and butters are skin cancer, breast, but it's not the most exciting. We should not do it for that. We should do it for pancreas, for high-grade brain tumors, and I think also for rectal locally advanced. Rectal recurrent pediatrics could be oysters. While we are doing it, we can test it, and it might give some benefit, but difficult to obtain. So my last is the typical tumor control, normal tissue complication probabilities. Not every patient is the same, and GARD, genomically adjusted radiation dose, might give us a clue before we start with the treatment whether the patient has a sensitive tumor, sensitive normal tissues or not. The red one is a typical high-grade brain tumor. So in only 8 years, a lot happened. It will be of benefit for sure for some patients, but the magnitude of the benefit we will have to define in future clinical studies. And this needs to be together. We cannot do it per department, per group. We have to collaborate. And that was a final. I just want to show the left lower. It looks like an advanced cyberknife. This is the future VHEE. Instead of a machine which is bigger than a proton machine, it can be as compact as, like, for example, a cyberknife, and be operated in a normal bunker, thanks to new technology. Also on the list. Thank you very much.